Hello and welcome. My cat is already here. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about whether or not you should spay your female rats. This is something that pops up in rat groups, I'd say fairly often, not like common, but often. And you might be wondering the benefits, the cons, that sort of thing. And I'm going to be going about this by basically first talking about why people spay their rats, going over it like point by point, just to make it as clear as possible what the benefits are. One of the reasons someone might spay their female rat is when something goes wrong with the uterus. The most common thing would be something called pyometra, which is basically a uterine infection. It is very aggressive, very stubborn, and antibiotics typically do not take care of it, especially because usually when the symptoms start presenting, it is very far advanced and your rat is not going to be in the best of shape. Uterine cancer is another issue that can crop up, both of which the best option is to spay. So under those circumstances, if your rat is young enough and healthy enough that you feel like they can get through the surgery, then yeah, your best option would be to have them spayed. Unfortunately, this is usually going to be an emergency situation, at least with pyometra. Uterine cancer can develop a little bit slower, but again, it presents in a similar way to pyometra, and it can be pretty aggressive and life-threatening to your rat. Juno's kicking, petting around. I just vacuumed, baby. You need Momo. She's hiding under her wheel now. But typically, yes, under those circumstances, if you feel like your rat can make it, then the best option would be to spay them. Now, the second reason people may spay their female rat is aggression. So I've talked about it many times. Y'all know this is the hill I will die on. But oftentimes with rats, both male and female, more common in male, not uncommon in females, around the 6-month mark, typically, they develop something called hormonal aggression. And that's basically once they've matured, their hormones spike, sometimes they don't come back down, and they become aggressive toward their humans or other rats. Typically, other rats is more common, I've noticed. Rats don't typically turn on their humans very easily. Probably because we don't spend as much time with them. I'm sure if we spent 24 hours with an aggressive rat, they would eventually bite us, even if they seem friendly beforehand. And yes, the best solution to this is spaying or neutering. So yes, if you notice your rat is fighting a lot, excessively fighting, excessively humping, trying to bite you, trying to bite other rats, those can be signs of hormonal aggression, and your best bet is to spay or neuter them to try and reduce those symptoms. It can be very, very effective. I've heard a lot of people say that it's not very effective in females, and while it sometimes isn't as effective, it is still very effective to the point that they can live a very happy life in a group with a human. Like everyone in that cage, well, not everyone. Baker's not a female. All 3 of my weather girls had to be spayed due to aggression issues, and I'd say Foggy and Cloud are perfectly normal rats now. And it's really only Sunny who still has some mild cage aggression that ever has an issue. And they were pretty bad. I don't personally subscribe to the no blood, no foul rule, which you'll hear floating around, just because sometimes you can see behavior that is indicative of aggression before they draw blood. So for example, Sunny, I had already decided to get her spayed, but I was feeding them one day, and at the time the weather girls were living with my old girl Humdrum, who was very old. She was 2.5 at this time, and she was a double Rex. She was very small, she was skinny, she was a frail little old lady, and they were both sitting on the door hammock, which is basically door hammock. And I opened the cage door to feed them, and Sunny got agitated that Humdrum was next to her, so she picked her up and threw her across the cage. And Humdrum wasn't injured at all, but that's obviously not good behavior, and that's the only time she ever did anything like that, because she got spayed like a week later. And she got a lot better after that. Now they currently live with Baker, and they're very happy with him. I do kind of feel like I could get them in with some females, so I might try that one day. Another hormonal thing that can happen is, you see it more often in males, but I have seen it work with females too, is you can spay them if they're extremely anxious. So if they have like a lot of anxious, stress behaviors, sometimes that is an indication that their hormones are out of balance. And if you spay or neuter, that can also help those behaviors and bring them back down to a calm state. It is not a guarantee by any means, because it's hard to say with anxious behaviors if it's hormonal based or just how the rat is, but sometimes it can help. Another reason that someone might spay their female rat is if they have an issue with tumors. So female rats in general, but females, it's way more common than males, have an issue with mammary gland tumors. Now, rats have a ton of mammary gland tissue, so much of it that vets are all just like, yeah, you can't even remove it. There's just so much. You just keep finding more. So that's why typically when they remove the tumor, they just remove the tumor and not too much tissue around it, because they want to get all the cells, but removing the mammary glands is just not going to happen. And the reason this is more common in females is because of their hormones. Their specific hormones produce the tumors much more frequently than a male's hormones will. So a lot of times if someone has a rat that has a tumor, they also get them spayed at the same time. I've done that. I did that with both Hex and Warren. I think just the two of them of my current rats. Yeah, just the two of them of my current rats that I've had spayed in conjunction with a tumor removal. I've done this with a few rats before them, and then Cappy did it with several of her rats. And the benefit is basically that it takes away that hormone and it helps either slow down the growth of tumors or helps prevent them from cropping up again. In my experience, they do tend to get tumors again. Both Hex and Warren have a tumor. Hex, I'm just pretty sure about. It's weird shaped, so I'm not 100%. Warren, for sure, it's a tumor. But typically, in my experience, it buys you a lot of time. So the most time I've gotten out of spaying a female rat between like tumors, I think is 9 months. And then the least amount of time is 5 months, which was Warren. So it does buy you a lot of time because, again, this is just my experience. But with my rats, they did not get spayed. They just had the tumor removed. Sometimes in as little as 3 weeks, the tumor came back. So it is something I recommend even just thinking about, depending on how old your rat is. For example, Orville and Hopper, they were both a year and 11 months old, so I opted to not spay them, and Hopper ended up passing away from respiratory issues. But Orville developed another tumor 6 weeks later, and that is ultimately why I had to put her to sleep. So it is a factor you should consider when doing a tumor removal. It does, in my experience, help, but it does not completely prevent. So the biggest factor for that, in my opinion, is age. The younger your rat is, so for example, Warren, I think, was a year and 10 months old, and Hex was a year and 7-ish months old. I opted to get both of them spayed because I felt like it might be better for them, like give them more time. I will say, Warren didn't give me a ton of time before developing another one. Missy, she's right there. And she was a year and 9 months old when I made the appointment, so if I had realized she'd be a little bit older, I might not have bothered with her. But, you know, it is what it is. And she's still here, so can't be that bad. Now, if your rat is young and you're still unsure, my question would be, where is the tumor? If it's in a hard surgical place, I would recommend spaying even more, because you definitely don't want that tumor to crop back up. Because the harder it is to remove, the harder the surgery is, and if it keeps cropping up in that spot, the harder it's going to be on your rat every single time. My friend Kendra has a rat who has terrible genetics, and she keeps getting a tumor right next to her urethra. She's barely over a year old. It's happened twice now, and she can't even get her spayed because this surgery is so intense that the vet's like, we just need to get this out and then we can talk about spaying her later. And it's so frustrating for her because it just keeps coming back. Now, the final reason, well, not the final reason, some people spay their female rats if they have contact with a male. In the States, you can try cabergoline, which is I think it's the same as Galistop, which is what's in the UK. But it's not a very common practice or easy to get a hold of. So in the States, a lot of time, if your female rat may or is pregnant, the only real solution is to spay them. And that's not always a feasible solution, since a lot of time you don't realize they're pregnant until they are as round as a football. So, but that is an option. I would personally try to get the cabergoline, which I'm pretty sure is the same as Galistop. All right. And finally, should you preventatively spay your female rats? So I have done a few of these. Curtains and Suitor were both preventative spays, as was Ducky and Dorothy. Those are the only preventative spays I've done. Lamb is spayed, but she was spayed due to hormonal issues. All three of them were spayed due to hormonal issues, and Sailor and Humdrum were both spayed due to hormonal issues. Or at least I thought so with Humdrum, but it didn't really fix her, so she was just mean. And she got over it at some point. So if you get them spayed preventatively, a lot of the stuff I've mentioned at the very least has a very low chance of happening. So they're definitely not going to get pregnant. I've heard some people say some tissues left behind, but I've never heard a vet say it. So as far as I know, pyometra is no longer an issue. Uterine cancer is no longer an issue. And then the thing with tumors. So if you get them spayed before they have issues with tumors, you'll often hear that the best time to get them spayed is between 4 and 6 months. That's before they have that surge of hormones. And if you just cut it off at the pass, basically, the chances of getting a tumor is much reduced. However, in my experience, if you get them spayed before they have an issue with a tumor, at any age, before they have issues with tumors, it is actually very beneficial. Humdrum was spayed at 1 year and 5 months old, and my friend's rat Wookie was spayed at 1 year and 6 months old? Something like that. It was very close together. And Wookie lived to 2 years and 10 months old. Humdrum lived to 3 years and 2 months old. And they were obviously well past 6 months old, and they both benefited from the spay. In my experience, it does greatly increase their lifespan. Ducky was spayed around 6 months old, and she is currently, her 3rd birthday is tomorrow as of this recording. Humdrum lived to 3 years and 2 months old. Sailor lived to 2 years, 11 months old. The Weather Girls are all over 2, and they haven't had any issues with tumors as of yet. So I do feel like, personally, in my personal experience, I have seen a lot of benefits from spaying them. I don't think necessarily you have to, because everyone in this cage is 2 years and 4 months old. Honey and Fifey are not spayed, and they haven't had any issues with tumors. They're from a breeder who's been breeding since the 90s, so she's worked out a lot of the kinks in her lines. And obviously, tumors are just part of having rats. You're not going to breed out tumors, but you can reduce the chances with good breeding by at least a little bit. Other factors in tumors is like diet. Obviously, we just went over genetics and weight. All of those are factors in whether or not your rat's going to get a tumor. And honestly, some of it's a fair bit of luck. Any experienced rat owner will tell you that a lot of time you can do everything right and have a nightmare of a rat, and you can do everything wrong, and some people have rats that live to 3.5 doing everything wrong. A lot of it's just luck. So you just have to do the best you can for them. Doing a preventative spay does fix issues like pyometra, uterine cancer, and reduces the chance of tumors, and reduces the chance of pituitary tumors. And in my experience, it just kind of keeps them young for a lot longer. However, it does not help with their weight. They do gain a lot of weight, and it's also very expensive. So that is one of the biggest factors for a lot of people, reasonably so. If you go and get 3 female rats, none of them are going to be spayed in all likelihood. Some rescues will have them spayed, but no one else would. So if you go and get 3 female rats, none of them are going to be spayed. And Jinx, what are you doing here? This is a different cat, y'all. I know my cats kind of look similar, but this one's different. She does not like that I'm holding her. There you go, baby. Some rescues will have them spayed, but if you rehome or get from a breeder, they're not going to come to you spayed. And so if you have to get 3 female rats spayed, that is, at least in my experience, that's going to be like $500. And at most, it'll be like $1,800 over $2,000. It is not a cheap procedure, depending on where you live, depending on if you can find a cheap vet that's also good. It is a daunting thing to have to do. And then there's the fact of rats don't always make it through surgery. Now, again, in my experience, I've done a lot of surgeries. Between me and my friends, we have done dozens and dozens of surgeries. And we have to date not lost any rats. And we've only had a couple that had complications. But it is more frequent that a small rodent is going to die under anesthesia than like a cat or a dog. And that is a factor. So if you take a perfectly healthy rat to the vet to have them spayed electively and they pass away, that is going to be a big burden on you. You're going to feel guilty. You're going to wish you hadn't done it. And that is something you need to factor in when deciding if you want to do a spay. Now you're gonna go after Jinx? She just can't let Jinx be happy. I do think numbers like 1 in 10 rats, half of rats, 90% of rats, all of which I've heard, are way, way overblown. If you have an experienced vet, they're typically very confident in their ability to do a surgery. So if you have a vet that is spouting things like that, I would honestly find a different vet. I would not hesitate to do a surgery when it was needed. Elective surgeries are different. And if you don't feel comfortable doing them, if it's too expensive, that is fine. You're not a bad rat owner if you choose to spay. You're not a bad rat owner if you choose not to spay. It's definitely one of those things where you just have to make a decision based on the facts you know, your experiences, and what you feel is the best decision for your rats. So yes, in my experience, spaying female rats does greatly increase their lifespan, but it is not a necessity. You can absolutely not do it, and they can live a completely full, happy life and even make it to a great age. So like, I just got those babies. Am I going to get them spayed? Probably not, to be perfectly honest. Now, if they get tumors, will I have them spayed when I get the tumor removed? Depending on their age, yes, I will. Because I do feel like that is the best option I have for them. Considering my situation with vets and my experience, I do feel like that is the best option for them. And hopefully, they'll still make it to a great age, even with that as a factor. The most important thing is that you give them the highest quality care that you can, and just give them a good life. At the end of the day, rats do not live very long, no matter whether you get them spayed or not. They have a lifespan of 2 to 3 years, and you get very lucky if they make it to 3 years. So just do the best you can for them based on what you feel is right. All right, that'll do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!